Okay, welcome back to another video in the Learned Code course. In this video, we're going to be primarily looking at the two's complement. We're going to touch a little bit on the syntax again. And if you're starting from this video, you probably want to look back at the last video. Just a quick interjection. So from recording this initial video, the runtime was pretty long. I might break this up into two videos. So recall from the sample code in the last video, we had this cout line of code, and that was the identifier for the output. Conversely, we have the cin that we can interject, and that's going to actually take in an input that we can type. You might want to use this end line command. So in this case, we're using that scope operator, and then we're looking at the standard here, as opposed to using namespaces. And what this is going to do, it's going to create a new line for the output. Now, by definition, anything stored in the buffer is going to be flushed to the output as soon as possible. And this might not make sense right now because we really don't understand what this buffer is yet. But there's also this /n option as well. And that's, again, going to create a new line. Now, the question is, where do we interject this end line or this /n? And to really think about how we can interject that, we kind of have to come to light and realize that we can chain outputs in the cout command. Now you could just have separate couts right here and output what you might want to output, and then have another line of code where you output an end line or a new line. But it would be very convenient if you could actually just chain those outputs. So we can open up Visual Studio again, and in this code, it's pretty similar to the code in video 1. Again, we're using this namespace and this standard right here. We're going to get rid of that in a second. But what we can do is actually remove the end line here. And what we can do is actually run our code. Right, so again, we have like, comment, share, subscribe, and let's duplicate this and then run that code. And this is the problem that you see. You have like, comment, share, subscribe, and then it repeats itself. So if we get rid of this comment right here, and we keep this in, and then again, we rerun our code, what you get is the double print of like, comment, share, subscribe, and now we get this new line. And actually, if we replace that with the new line command, you can see that, again, you get the same thing. So what we could actually do is comment that out, and then we're going to use that scope operator again, except now notice that this end line command, we also have to scope that out. So just to make things nice, let's clear the output and then let's run it and see what happens. Now we can just uncomment lines 8 and 9, and of course we're going to need to use that scope operator to really see what we're going to do. You can see that the output was red and then blue, as we indicated the code to do here. But we can take this one step further and get rid of these lines of code. And again, we're just going to need to use that scope operator. So we chain together red, new line, blue, then another new line. Notice here with the new line, both here and here, we did not need to use the scope operator. So taking things back to the whiteboard, we can move on to our next kind of speaking point, and that's where we are going to define integers using this int right here, floating points using float, and then characters as char or char I've also heard, but this isn't all we can do. We can also define something called strings, which are sequence of characters. So a string could be the word string itself. Now, to use strings, we have two things that we can do. We can scope it, and then the format will look something like this, where we would have the name of our string, and then what our string is, and of course end that in a semicolon. Or in some cases, you may want to include the string library, so that's going to look like that in the header part of your code. And then notice here we can get rid of that scope command, and we can follow a similar format. So in this video, we're going to be playing the game of back and forth inside of Visual Studio. So let's just comment out the previous stuff we looked at, And we can uncomment the rest of our code. Maybe it's best to delete everything so we can fit it all on the screen. So right here, we have our integer a, which is an integer. We have our floating point b. So you can see that you don't necessarily have an integer right there. And then we define a character c as the $sign. And then in lines 10 through 12, we're simply going to have an output. So if we just start this as getting rid of lines 11 and 12, and we're going to run it, you can see here that we indeed printed A, B, and C, and then the word nice. But there's something interesting here. We have a little gap between the $sign and nice, and that's because instead of using the new line like we did for A and B, we used /t, which will tab over and then print what we want to print. Now we can clear the output, we can comment this out, and we can uncomment lines 11 and 12. So what we're going to be doing here is defining this string. It's going to be scoping in the standard. Notice here we commented out the namespace. The name of that string is string1. And what does string1 say? Well, it says this is a string. And then in line 12, we are outputting string1. And then we have a new line. So if we do that and run the code, you can see that this is a string. Now going back to the whiteboard again. Now including just a little bit more content on the syntax is this return 0. And this is used primarily at the last line of code in the main. And I guess you could say this is sort of as convention to show success of the code. And it's just going to return the value 0. So you could actually set it to anything you want. Maybe think of this as error code recognition, where if your code runs well, you want it to return a 0. If there's some error that happens, return a 1. So if we hop back in, you can see here at the end, we're just going to add return 0, clear the terminal, run the code. You can see done, exited with code 0 in that amount of time. Now, if we comment that out in Visual Studio, you can see that it still exits with code 0. So if we uncomment that, and let's return something else if the code is successful, clear our output and run it as we have. Now you can see that we exited with the code that we set here in the return value. So that's as much as we'll be using Visual Studio for this video, because we're going to jump into something else. Now above, when we looked at this floating point using float, there's kind of a few ways we can actually look at a number with decimal places. And that's going to be float versus double. Now we could interchangeably swap out float for double in the case of the code that we just looked at. And if you do a quick web search, what you'll get is that float has 7 decimal digits of precision, while double has 15 digits of precision. So the question really is, which one to use? And maybe to help decide that, you want to ask yourself, which takes up more memory? So float will take up 4 bytes, while double takes up 8 bytes, so double takes up more memory. But this artifact might not mean anything to you, because we don't even know what a byte is. If you learned anything new, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.